There we go. The second question that teacher preparation programs need to ask is, how does the curriculum address these objectives? So in other words, teachers need to know something, they need to be able to do something, and they need to demonstrate impact on student performance. So what we have to align is the curriculum to those three things. Is the curriculum at my institution in Missouri, or any institution across the country that is preparing quality teachers, does the curriculum match knowledge, skills, and impact on student learning? So the question is, will this curriculum need to be revised to encompass the expectations of the Common Core? What do we have to do on a curriculum basis? And it's not simply tweaking necessarily a class that's already there, or, oh, we need to add a class on technology. We're looking at the large scope of curriculum. And then what resources will be needed to initiate and complete and evaluate these changes? So it's one thing to say that we need to revamp teacher preparation in this country. It's another thing to say, in a time of very, very limited resources and budgets beginning to dwindle, what resources are we going to need to execute positive change? There was a time not too long ago when I first came into this job that if you wanted to execute change, you had the shotgun approach. You could do a lot of everything and then build an assessment system into that and find out what worked for you and what didn't. And then you drop away the things that didn't seem effective. With the limited resources now, we don't have the luxury of being able to do that. We have to be very precise in the kind of changes that we are making. And they have to be informed decisions. We don't have the resources, the time, the money, or the faculty to implement broad sweeping changes and then take a step back later on and decide, I wonder if this worked or not. And at the same time, the student performance cannot suffer because we're going down a road that we haven't fully explored. Then the next question. What professional development will be needed for faculty to prepare them to effectively address the Common Core within the curriculum? So not only are the new teachers that we are preparing on college campuses to go out and work in the field, but what kinds of professional development do we need to provide to the teachers that are already out in the field, the ones that have been working for a while? Well, how can we use our resources as a teacher preparation institution to help the districts be more effective at the implementation of the Common Core? So we ask ourselves simply, what does the faculty need to know? Is simply presenting the standards to them enough? And perhaps it is. Perhaps we can say, using your professional judgment, here are the standards. How do you implement them best in your classroom? And then we get to the big elephant in the room. How do these considerations inform the process of both state and national accreditation? That as teacher preparation programs, we are held accountable to sets of standards. Where does the notion of college readiness and the Common Core standards fit ultimately into that equation? So I think that's the larger picture from a teacher preparation perspective that ultimately we have to deal with. So I want to take a step back and look at Missouri and some of the challenges we've been facing in Missouri. And some of these challenges are universal challenges. They're challenges you may be facing in your states. Others might be more specific to Missouri, but I think it ultimately speaks to some of the challenges that we're facing. All right. The relationship of accreditation to content standards in Missouri, and I'm going to speak from an English perspective, but this also works for mathematics as well, that we have the Common Core state standards are at the top of our pyramid, but then supporting those standards in the state of Missouri, we actually have two sets of academic standards. We have the national content standards. These are the NCTE standards and the NCTM standards, the National Council of Teachers of English and National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. And they have their national set of standards. So those of you that have gone through NCATE accreditation and have written the SPA report, you are writing to the national standards. And again, the national standards are based in what teacher candidates need to know. The Common Core are based in what students need to do. So there is this separate distinction between what the expectations of the two standards are. Now in Missouri, this gets a little bit more complicated because in Missouri we also have what are called subject-specific competencies. So in Missouri, we have a set of English standards, and we have a Missouri-specific set of mathematics standards. So how this works is if you're going through a state and national accreditation, and my institution just went through NCATE accreditation back in September, so I know. If we go through a SPA review process, we have to do 2 different reports. So we write one SPA report that addresses all of the NCTE standards, and then we write a separate program report for the state that addresses all of the subject-specific competencies. And the idea is to try to build assessments that align to both of those kinds of things. But having read hundreds, literally hundreds of SPA reports across the country, institutions have a difficult time doing that. And what some do is they create one set of assessments for their state accreditation, they create one set of assessments for their national accreditation, and they move forward. So now that we have the Common Core on top of that, we're complicating it even further. So as an institution, what I'm looking at for my accreditation is 3 separate sets of standards, and how do I juggle all 3 of those in the air at one time? How do I deal with the Common Core? How do I deal with the national? And how do I deal ultimately with the state? And this thing's going to switch off on me again, I bet. Maybe I just need to talk faster. Okay. So in Missouri, we did a standards gap analysis, and this is where we stand now, to try to see what is the interplay between all of these things. And so what we did is we began with our state content standards. And I know you can't read this, and that's by design, because these are going to get a little bit complicated. But there are 4 benchmark content standards in English, 1, 2, 3, 4. For the first one up here that you can't read, it says Fundamentals of Effective Use of English. All right, so teacher candidates need to know the effective and fundamental use of English. I think that's probably pretty important. Then under that, there's a 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3. So there's 3 sub-indicators under that. So that list is a lot more complicated than it looks. For the second one, there's actually 6 sub-indicators underneath that. And then for the third one, there's 9 sub-indicators underneath that. So as a teacher preparation institution in Missouri, I am held accountable to those particular standards. And I need to have an assessment system built into my program that shows how well my candidates are performing on those things. So that's where we began. And then what we add to this is we say, okay, now we have the Common Core state standards. What is the relationship between these two? Because how I'm preparing my teachers now in Missouri, and I'm speaking for the state of Missouri, which I probably shouldn't do, we're teaching our students the state standards. So the question that we began asking ourselves later this fall is, what is the relationship between those state standards and the Common Core state standards? And then we complicate it even further with the NCTE standards, which are our national standards. And we said we need some kind of a formal process to see how all of these pieces begin to fit together. Because right now we have 3 separate entities that we're trying to deal with. So what the gap analysis did is it basically said, let's take the state content standards and let's align them up next to the Common Core standards and see where there are gaps, see where there are fits. Now, this raises an issue that came up very quickly, and I think it's a good issue. And it's what I was saying earlier about the semantics and the verbs that we're using between these 2 sets of standards. One set of standards, that standard set on the left, is all grounded in what teachers need to know. And the Common Core is based on what students need to do. So as we began to do this gap analysis work, we began making certain assumptions. And the certain assumption says, if a teacher knows A, students should be able to perform well on A. But those of us in education know that that's a false premise to draw conclusions from. So what we're trying to do is think, okay, what is the relationship then between a particular piece of content knowledge and the performance that a student is going to have in the classroom? And that's the work that we're doing right now that we're hoping to finish later this spring. The next step in this process, once we have that done from a state of Missouri perspective, then we need to do the next gap analysis in which we take that clump and we're going to compare it to the NCTE standards for institutions that are going through NCATE SPA review. what is the relationship between the Common Core and your individual state content standards and what the national accrediting bodies are asking for with NCTE? Is there a relationship? And then you can begin to work backwards if you want, but we're going to be happy if we can just get through these first 3 stages.